I'm Chad Evan Collins, and this is the Marketing on Demand show. I set out to answer the million-dollar question. What is the biggest needle mover in your business, and what drives people to buy faster than anything else? Through selling over $30 million of my own products and services and setting 2 Guinness World Records for ticket sales along the way, I discovered how to move the needle consistently and quickly. If you're a marketer, e-commerce seller, entrepreneur, or founder, join me as I reveal my exact strategies and see what today's smartest business leaders are doing right now to explode their sales. Do you want to learn how to boost your sales using these methods? Text the word DEMAND to 90851. That's DEMAND to 90851. Now, here's the show. Hey, it's Chad Evan Collins here, your host of the Marketing on Demand show, where we feature top marketers, entrepreneurs, and brands about the strategies, tactics, and tools they're using right now to move the needle in their business. And today, I want to bring in my man, Sean Flanagan. Now, listen, Sean, for the last 19 years, has been creating effective award-winning work for clients big and small, such as Gorilla Glue, Gerber Blades, and Under Armour, where he worked on campaigns with the likes of Tom Brady, Bryce Harper, Steph Curry, and more. He's now the active creative director for the Philadelphia Eagles. Sean brings a wealth of knowledge from the entire advertising and branding lifecycle, from print to digital, broadcast to experiential, and we're thrilled to have him here. Sean, what's going on, man? Welcome to the Marketing on Demand show.
Chad, I'm excited, man. This is great. It looks great, which that obviously is very important to me. But I think you're doing a great job, man. In this short term, you have this up and running.
Yeah, man. Thanks so much. So I think we'll get into some of the Chad Sean history at some point, but this episode is going to be primarily about the awareness end of marketing on demand. We talk about awareness-based advertising. We talk about direct response-based advertising. And the reason I wanted to bring Sean in is because of his very unique experience with working with some of the biggest stars in the world, with the biggest brands in the world, really about awareness, about what their brand, what their products and services look like and feel like to the public. So Sean, before we get into some of those details, I want to know, and Sean and I met in college at Penn State. I want to know, at what point did you realize that advertising, that brand building was going to be something you wanted to sink your teeth into?
Well, I think, I've always had a knack for not only just for like art and that sort of thing, but storytelling through that stuff. I think I always used it not to make like pictures you'd hang on a wall, but mostly as commentary. So mostly comics and drawing doodles and entertaining friends, family, and honestly how I communicated a lot of how I was feeling about things outside the world through just funny, kind of trying to entertain and be humorous. And that actually is helpful because, I went right into advertising. That's what I did at Penn State. I need to do that quickly. And, in ads, you only have like 3 seconds or whatever to sort of hook someone or whatever. So that was kind of, not knowing it at the time, was early training, just, doing editorial cartoons for newspapers and things like that. Was just shorthand for storyboarding and really creating succinct, lightning quick, little entertaining value type snippets, and that plays out now because, with all of our attention being scattered and fragmented across all these different screens, you have even less time. So yeah, I think that was
when businesses now are thinking about what their brand should look like and feel like, they need to answer a bunch of questions for themselves, right? What does like we here at this show had to think about what should the Marketing on Demand show look like when someone's watching it on Facebook or on YouTube, right? What does the intro want to sound like? Do we want to sound intense, right? Like the intro sounds now, or just want to sound like lofty and woo-woo, right? We needed to make all these decisions ahead of time before we went to market. When you're working with a talent, or when you're working with a new brand that you want to work on as a one-on-one client, what are some of the things you ask them about shaping what they're going to look like and feel like to the marketplace?
Well, I think what you're talking about and what is really useful tool for us is it's called a creative brief. And, that's, you form that. Now, obviously that pertains to like certain specific projects. When you're starting out around the brand, you really want to talk to them and peel back layers and say, hey, what do you guys see as the sort of the blue ocean for your business? You have all these competitors, and odds are there's probably somebody doing something a little similar to what you're doing. It's finding that little unique thread, right? And I think you hit the nail on the head. The tone of your communications, the aesthetic, all those things need to be thought through and how they're going to be different. And I think you really need to be honest with yourself as a brand, because that's what a brand is. A brand is so much more than a logo or, the pictures or whatever. It's living, breathing entity that you need to live. When even the sound of your voice, Chad, the way you talk, how energetic you are, the positivity you exude, that's part of your brand. So all those things, I think people make the mistake of thinking like, well, I'm going to go make a brand, so I need to hire a logo designer. And that's probably like 1/16 of what you need to do. You need to know what your brand smells, feels, and tastes like, to the outside world. And you need to be constantly thinking about it. You can't take any of those things for granted, and you need to be on all the time, even when it's big corporations with a product to sell or your personal brand. I mean, you and I, we've had discussions in the past about personal brands too. So I think it's just on a different scale. And I think that's, people always forget about, like, the design is only going to get you not as far as maybe you think if you don't just, throw everything else at it.
Yeah. And I say those repetitive messages that you're going to put out there for your brand, where you're not necessarily expecting anything in return, right? You're not necessarily saying, I'm going to put some branded content out there and I expect this ROI on my ad spend for that branded content. You're putting it out there because you want to get eyeballs, you want to get impressions. So when it's time to then go for the sale or go for the next logical step, whatever that is in your business, there's already some familiarity with you and your brand.
There is. And that it builds trust. And I think the biggest thing, you need to be consistent with your brand. You can't be chasing down the next kind of like fad or anything. You really need to kind of establish these pillars and subscribe to them and live them consistently, even when eyeballs aren't on you, because people will look back. I mean, this day and age, people want to know that you're going to be around for a little while and you're committed to what you do. And then they're going to dig back and be like, all right, well, they've been doing it for X amount of years. Like your podcast, for example, like you're just building an audience and getting traction, but there's going to become a time a couple months from now, or maybe a month now if you're doing it right. But odds are with podcasts, it's going to be 3 or 4 months from now. People are just going to discover it. And they're going to feel good looking back that you already have 20 episodes. You're like, wow, how have I missed this thing? Because this guy's dedicated to doing what he does. This isn't a flash in a pan. So I think people need to understand that, it's that immediate return is kind of stuff of fantasies mostly. You need to kind of do the hard work when nobody's really looking. And that's when it pays off, because you feel good about your brand story.
Yeah, very well said, Sean. I think about a lot where there's a lot of there are a lot of people that are telling you put out all this content all the time. And a lot of the reason they put behind it, they'll tell you, put out whatever, 20, 40 pieces of content a week. And because maybe one of them will hit, maybe one of them will be shared. And if it's not this week, then maybe it would be next week, and if it's not this month, then maybe it will be next month. And people are conditioned, I feel like, to put out content just to get the one thing that hits, to make them go viral. So then they become, quote, famous or internet famous in their niche, where really, to your point, what the mentality should be is all of that content that you're putting out is awareness-based brand building. The end. It's awareness-based brand building, the end. You're building an audience. You're building people that you can go back to later with your offer. And if one happens to catch fire, great. But that should absolutely not be the reason why we're putting the content out. We're putting the content out because we think it could be helpful for just one other person. If one other person finds it useful, then that's fantastic. And I'm talking obviously from the personal brand,
Yeah.
maybe influencer marketing standpoint. But I think there's just a lot of folks that are telling people to put out content for the sake of putting out content,
Yeah.
and they're not thinking about it from a brand perspective.
I think from a brand perspective, you got to figure out that one thing you're going to be famous for and continue to go at it. And again, it's that long haul. And if it doesn't hit right away, we got to keep going, because eventually, personal brand side, you're going to be looked at as a subject matter expert, right? On the other end, you're going to become famous for that one thing, and people are going to build trust, and they're going to be looking for that next thing. But getting famous for that one thing is going to give you license to sort of expand your brand, because you're going to kind of need to keep going and reinventing a little bit, but still staying in that lane. Otherwise, people aren't going to trust what you're putting out there. They're just going to feel like you're not committed to any one thing or making a difference. And why is it different from this other thing value-wise?
So you've worked with some of the biggest sports talents on the planet, right? As of this recording, right? I mean, we mentioned in the intro, right? Tom Brady, Steph Curry. You work with one of the most storied franchises in the NFL right now, the Philadelphia Eagles. Yeah. What are some of the things that you've seen these big brands or big celebrities do, right? Because when you're working with the individual talent celebrity, right, they have their own personal brand that they're worried about. Yes. Yeah, they're hooked up with Under Armour, and Under Armour is going to bring a product to market for them. But what has been important to them where you say, that's pretty interesting. I could take some of that, or that was a piece of nugget that I'd like to share where other people I know can find useful too?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. Those guys do have a personal brand outside of the brand partnership or the endorsement that they're certainly involved with. So everything that goes out, because people cut through that, they don't necessarily see Under Armour as the first, brand front and center. They see the Steph Curry brand, right? So there is a lot of back and forth, and we're caretakers of that. We've got to toe this line of, we understand what your personal brand is, but we also want to push you a little bit, because we're also, purveyors of style, right? We've got to read the tea leaves in terms of the audience and taste levels and things that are out there, and say, hey, in the case of like Steph Curry, maybe he's on a little more on the conservative end, or even Tom Brady, right? But, kids are buying these really loud cleats and shoes or whatever, you know what I mean? I'm just using a bad example. Like, we need to sort of echo that in our marketing, and you might be a little bit uncomfortable with that, but I think, somebody famous said, like, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. That's, sort of a mantra that, definitely have been using the last couple of years. That's our job. That's your job as a brand manager and a creative director. You got to bring those fresh ideas and kind of push the envelope a little bit. Now, the odds are you'll throw it out there. It'll be so far downfield that they're just completely uncomfortable. But maybe the hope is, in the back of your mind, the win looks like 50% of that, right? This is so crazy. Steph's never going to go for it. He might shock you and be like, yeah, great. But if he pulls it back a little, at least he's still stretched, and it's sort of this nice hybrid of what he's comfortable with and what the brand's comfortable with, because we know from a sales standpoint, that's going to move the needle, right?
Yeah, I mean, if as the seller of the goods, and you have a celebrity endorser, right, for argument's sake, your mind and your decision making is based on what's going to sell the most, clearly. Mm-hmm. And you need to bring the talent on board. I'm wondering, what similarities have you seen with either the big brands, right? And we could talk about Gorilla Glue maybe, versus the talent. So when a brand is looking to bring their product or launch a new product, right, in one of their many different products or services they offer, when to bring something new to the market versus working with an individual where they now have the new shoe or the new cleat.
Well, I would say the versus for a company, and when you're just talking about like end use categories and things like that, that's usually identifying, what's missing, and sort of getting a lot of audience feedback of like, What's a problem you're solving for that athlete in the case of Under Armour? Or in the case of Gorilla Glue, like, contractors, in how we're missing strong glues, right? We can always make glue stronger, always make those things, but they're hard to use, right? So how can we streamline a lot of that? Or at the time when I worked on Gorilla Glue, duct tape was duct tape, and they were coming out with an even stronger duct tape. So like positioning that as like, it's Gorilla tape, it's not duct tape, it's 3 times stronger. It's finding that, again, I go back to blue ocean, like what's that one thing? And then you kind of run hard at that. And you're basically providing an innovation that they never knew they needed. Right. And then, hopefully it works out and it's, nobody calls bullshit on it and it succeeds and it does what it says, or you say it's going to do. So there's no bad feelings or anything like that. The other way is you trump it up. It's this great innovation and it doesn't really kind of cut it. And then that's when you can kind of take a hit. And that's kind of what a lot of companies, when they bring products to bear, like there's a lot of research involved in that. And they know that this is an opportunity. When you're talking about athletes, again, it's always their personal brand. It's all their credibility on the line. It's sometimes, it's their legacy, right? Maybe you're getting an athlete, maybe in the case of Tom Brady, that is on the back end of his career. Now he'll keep going and we don't know when Tom Brady's going to quit, but every year it's that conversation of like, this is his last year. This is last year. So they're looking ahead at like how they can solidify their legacy. And, they're probably less concerned about this specific product, but more concerned about, well, how does this fit into the sort of the anthology? Right. And so that's that balance. And I think it's interesting because you really get to know, it's easier maybe working with the athlete because you can get it pretty straightforward. It's an audience of one, and you're there to consult because you're the voice of the audience that's going to be seeing all that stuff. But I would much rather prefer to work with the individual and craft that message and understand and reinvent, if we have to, their image than try to like, the other way is a lot of fun too. It's just a lot more involved. Layers wise.
When it comes to knowing you have a winning awareness campaign versus an awareness campaign that is sputtering, where you need to inject some new energy into it, what kind of lessons have you seen or learned along the way? Do you have an example of an audible that you made that made a big impact in one way or another?
I don't know if I have a really good example off the top of my head. I think it's, sometimes you trot all of these things out, and as you're looking at them internally, you look at them all together, right? When you're looking at a campaign, you look at every element. You're looking at a hang tag to a logo, to an ad, to the web page, to the app, to whatever. It's all together on your screen. You're like, wow, this really looks great together. But sometimes you don't realize that people aren't seeing all these things together in the real world. They're seeing one at a time. Or, and if you're lucky and you're doing it and you're spending enough money against it, they're seeing it back to back in certain different places. So sometimes it's easy to sort of drink the Kool-Aid of your own creation, in that, we're going to say this and we're going to have X amount of bullet points. We're going to have a headline, but we have the subheadline, and we want to like communicate 3 different benefits. And you down the line, you realize that, the opportunities you've created for yourself really only have room for about one benefit. So it's having the discipline to isolate that one benefit, because that might be the only thing you get across. And that's a trap sometimes, so like it's really great. And as a manufacturer, sometimes you look at this thing, it does this one ring really well, but don't forget about these awesome zippers over here and these deep, deep pockets and this waterproofness of it. And like, man, after that, like people are just like, what does it do well? So I think focus and having the ability to retool the campaign mid-flight to focus and streamline a little bit and to isolate messages. And maybe during, your analytics runs and sort of your social listening, you see what the conversation starts becoming, and having the ability and the nimbleness to kind of go back and retool some stuff, I think is a big advantage. So that's why a lot of times what I like to do is work with what are called style guides and brand guides for certain things. So you build a toolkit of elements, whether that's visual or whatever, creative wise. And that way you can kind of mix and match things. Again, if you reach a retooling scenario where you're just kind of freshening, trying to refresh creative after creative fatigue of whatever you determine that is, 3 months, 90 days, or, having that ability to do that, I think is huge. So when you build brands, you're not just doing it for that one execution. You have to build these kits for longevity to scale too, to big executions down to even like small little buttons and sort of banner ads in Facebook and things like that. But that all needs to be on brand. It all needs to be consistent and look like it comes from the same place.
Yeah, I think the big takeaway here is focus and simplicity. What's interesting, I think, even from an awareness standpoint, is when you're putting content out there in video form and written form, you can, I think you're right. I mean, you see what people are sharing, right? And even if you're not getting a lead per se or a sale per se, you can see how people are engaging with the content you put out there on social media. And you could put 5 pieces of content out there. One of them has 200 shares and another one has 2 shares. Well, now you know what people are most interested in. And that gives you, as you say, like reading the tea leaves, you got to be paying attention to that stuff, because now that's giving you a cue on what type of content the audience that you're going after wants and speaks to them.
And you know what inevitably happens? It's the content that you spent the least amount of time on.
100%.
And that's disheartening sometimes, I think, because as creatives, we really want to sweat the details and make everything epic and huge. And I learned that a couple of years ago. It's just like we were just spending all this money, all this time and effort filming these commercials, and then that gets X amount of views, and then you throw up this little GIF, and it's just like blows it out of the water, and you're like, that
right.
was really
This
worth it.
cost, this spent me 30 minutes, and this I spent 3 weeks on.
Right. But you have to be humble enough to recognize that. I think you need to be humble and smart enough to know that, like, yeah, I invested a lot in this one piece and it did about a third as well as this other piece that I spent 2 seconds on and did because I was trying to just be part of the conversation. You got to recognize, I mean, it's disheartening, I know, but if you don't do that, I think you're going to end up failing more often than not, because you're just not listening to what your audience is saying.
Yeah. I mean, I have a good, to +1 that a bit for our live events business. One of our events, the Lego event, Brickfest Live, we spent early on, we spent a bunch of money on producing like these high-end sizzle reels, right? We had video.
A little good sizzle reel.
Yeah, we had video production crews come out to the event. They would do time lapses, and we have like a 30-second spot, a 90-second spot, etc. And we would run those mainly in a direct response marketing standpoint, where we're going for lead gen. We would run those, and they would do okay. And then we put up a boomerang video that I took on my phone at one of my events, and that thing blew the high production stuff out of the water. It wasn't even close. And since then, the only type of content we used was literally stuff like we had a show, and it was someone's job at the show, just take as many pictures and get as many videos from your phone and just upload them to this folder afterwards. And we would just go pull stuff from that folder, and they would become our best performing ads.
But you didn't have so much pride in the work that you slaved over
that you spent a lot of money on.
And yeah, that too. So, but I mean, look, that's the mark of just learning. And I think you need to be that adaptive,
Yeah, for sure. I'd like to go after some, there were some big takeaways already that people can immediately start implementing or thinking about in their business. You talked about a style guide, right? Or a brand guide. You talked about making sure you have kind of all of your assets in a singular place that you have easy access to, that you could share with others. You want to make sure there's continuity between all the different avenues that you're running your campaigns on. Are there any other, tools or guides that people should have a folder they should make with different types of content in there that you could suggest? Like if I'm starting from either I'm starting from nowhere, or you know what, I have a brand, or I think I have a brand, but if I just like brought this all together, I would see it maybe a little bit differently. What advice do you have for people about collecting that to making sure they have one cohesive area where all of their brand assets could be, to help them make decisions on going forward, right? If something's not working, maybe it's going to pop right out there once they have everything together.
I think you've got to look at every element. Capturing everything in a Dropbox or a Google shared doc. And if your goal is to work with folks that are maybe remotely or whatever, and they're tasked with being stewards of your brand, you very much need it in an easy to share type of place, right? So Dropbox is great for that. I like to be a little more visual, so I put everything sort of in a Google Slides kind of scenario. So it's all laid out with deep links into Dropbox. But that there you can kind of see everything visually laid out, to your point, and you can see the consistency, because that's really, again, that only time where your whole brand is kind of together. So when you break it apart, you're confident it's all going to ladder up to the same thing. And not overthinking, like, don't use a million fonts. Don't use a million different colors. Establish these things and set them in stone. And that's it. There's no negotiation. Be ruthlessly, strict about that stuff. My font's Helvetica, right? And Chad, you get it something, you're like, well, I don't know if I have Helvetica. I'll just use Arial. It's a modern font. It's probably the same. No, that's a timeout. You have to be your own, brand police, and you need to be a bastard about it. I know I am. And sometimes I probably annoy my teams and things like that. We have rules around, the Eagles, degrees, like angles we can set things on and layouts. So it's either straight or it's 33 degrees. And that's all based on rules that we've derived from the Eagles logo. I mean, I could show you a whole page. We've written rules around these. So we publish these rules, and there's no gray area. I love that you have your black and white motif. You're going to appreciate this. It's black or white. It's 0 degrees or 33 degrees. Those are your two angle options. Everything else is wrong, and you're going to get called out. Even partners, when we look at their creative and they come back and we have to prove it, like, this is like 45 degrees or it's like 25. It's not, it's close, but it's not what we need. So I think setting up rules and, I'm a big fan of simplicity. So I think starting out, not making it too tough on yourself to manage those things, and set it and forget it. But the goal is you set a finite and a small amount of rules, but there's infinite ways to combine them to keep things fresh.
I love that idea of creating a Google slide deck where all of the assets live, and then go and link to, I mean, even if you had a unique font that was your font, all right, cool. So you have a Google slide, that's the font. And then if someone doesn't have that font, well, they could just click the link and download it. And now they have it, and now they're ready to go.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, that's awesome. So right out of the bat, I would advise, if you're listening to this and you want to take your brand a little bit more seriously, go ahead and create that Google slide deck and just start putting the logos that you use, start putting the headshots that you want to use, that you want others to use on your behalf, right? If you're going to be a guest on someone else's podcast and they put that post on Facebook with you and them, well, you should be dictating what that photo is that they're going to be used, not something they're just going to Google and find where, it's maybe not your best look, or it's not on brand for you.
It's really versatile because it becomes that shareable thing. It's your brand guide. It's your brand toolkit, that toolkit I was talking about. Like, establish your colors, do the breakdowns, so there's no guesswork for anybody. And they're going to be able to quickly turn things around that, you don't have to make everything. That's going to save you time, right? But you're going to set them, they're already set up 50% of the way. They just need to kind of pull and reformat it for the content. But you're going to be something that's a kissing cousin in your brand, or right on brand with a little bit of tweaking.
All right. I've got 3 quick questions for you, and then we're going to bring this home, Sean.
Great.
First question. Who is one person that inspires you?
Wow. One person that inspires me. A lot of people inspire me. My attention span is, every day is part of my routine is just scrolling. I mean, I've set up my social feeds and my go-to readings in the morning to be inspired every day. So that's just part of my process. Like I don't want to waste time just on, shit that doesn't matter, to be honest. So it's full of inspiration right now. And I'd say, a lot of the artists that I'm working with, we've got a poster series going on at the Eagles right now. Seeing all those artists' interpretations of our brand and things like that are hugely inspiring. Looking at a lot of different motion graphics from Hollywood, artists that do, sort of the title bumpers of shows and things like that. It's where I get inspiration. I think it's less about one person. It's more about the work that
I like that you mentioned that you have your feed set up to be inspired every morning. I mean, that's such a big takeaway because there are so many people that just mindlessly scroll on their social feeds and they don't do it with intent. And it sounds like if there is the one thing, it's to set up your social feed. So with the intention that you're going to go into it and you're going to find something that drives you.
That's absolutely. I just want to make sure that time counts. And as a driven individual like yourself, I nothing, annoys me more than feeling like I'm wasting time or, idle hands or things like that. I always feel like I'm trying to, upgrade or basically keep pace, to be honest. I feel like there's probably way more driven people out there doing twice as much as I do in a day. So that's the only way I can kind of feel like I'm keeping up.
I love it. So I'm sure you have something in mind here. This next one is name like a cool tool or an app or extension that you're using right now.
Look, I've been in pure education mode with Adobe After Effects. I think I'm more of a traditionally groomed designer in my background. So learning motion graphics, I think, is a huge plus if you want to do what we do in the future. Not just the static stuff, but having some motion chops. So I'm trying to add that to my arsenal. So for probably about the last, I'd say it's going on about 2 years now. I do wake up pretty much every morning and do online classes through LinkedIn Learning and things like that, because I got to get there. And I think that's how I'm going to differentiate my personal brand. And I can it's not so much about me doing it, where I want to be able to do it, but it's also being able to talk intelligently to somebody who's a pro at it. And I can use the right terminology so I don't look like a chump. And I'm kind of like, we can kind of talk the same language. I'm not doing it, and they're probably way more creative at it, but I can at least communicate what I'm looking for. And as a creative director, my job is a lot less doing, admittedly, these days than it is sort of communicating what I'm looking for and how.
I'll tell you what, that is true across the board. And I'll bring this even to like a Facebook advertising conversation. There are so many people that hire agencies to run Facebook and Instagram and YouTube traffic for them. And they'll pay a lot more because they don't know the language. They haven't done it themselves. So they're paying because they're ignorant in those things. You're going ahead and every morning saying, you know what, I got to stay on top of this because I can articulately communicate with the person that's actually going to be doing it, my vision, so they can deliver to me exactly the thing that I need in return. Huge.
And that's always been a thing. I mean, that's what I did with photography back in my early days. I know I wanted to be an art director, and I'm on set running these photo shoots as an art director, creative director. I got to be able to communicate to the photographer what I'm looking for, or he's going to just laugh my ass off set. And, so I think that goes with everything. You just kind of need to know enough or learn enough to be dangerous and effective.
Yeah. I mean, I think what you're doing is more than, if you had to, you can get in there and do the work, which is great.
I always want to feel like that too. I think that's always in the back of your mind going, okay, well, if push came to shove and we were really in a pinch.
Yeah. I could get in there and
let me crack this open. We'll get it done.
It's huge. All right. Last one. I'd like to know if there's a book or podcast that you're into right now and why.
Podcasts, no, not really. Since we've been home, I think with like a lot of the rest of the world, and I know we're on a podcast right now, but haven't had the commute to really fall back on to bone that up.
Yeah.
Actually, and then in terms of books, like my free time is spent decompressing. So I think I'd love to give you some great educational book that I'm reading, but right now I've just crushed Mother Night by Kurt Vonnegut, and I've been boning up on Vonnegut because I never really read him back in the day, and I feel like as an artist I should or something. So there's a hole in my game I've identified, real or not, but yeah, I just don't want to. Those times are for decompression. I think I'm already doing enough, in the business hours for my profession that I need to give me some just imagination space.
I love it. Sean, for those that are listening that want to connect with you, where should we point them?
Yeah, SeanFlanagan.com. I think there you can get a look at a lot of the work I've done over the last few years. You can kind of listen to our podcast, which is on a little bit of a hiatus, called Creative How. I do it with my partner Jed Jesslin, and if you need anything, that's where, if you want to continue the conversation, that's where you can find me.
Awesome. Thanks so much for hanging out for this half hour. It's been a
blast.
Man,
it's been great. I'm really psyched. I'm excited to watch this show come together, man. Again, like when you set your mind to do something, I love it. I love watching you develop these things because you go all in it. And honestly, man, you're so intuitive about these things. You are one of those people I am inspired by.
Thanks so much, Sean. All right, everyone, check out SeanFlanagan.com. I'm sure there's links there to his own IG, his email, all of that. He is a talent. You could tell by the people that he's worked with, the companies that he's worked for. And if you're looking to grow your brand and you just need someone to ask questions to, there's no one better in the place than my man, Sean. All right. Thanks so much. And thanks for checking out Marketing on Demand Show. Hey, real quick, if you enjoyed this episode, please let me know by rating this podcast and leaving me an honest review. If you found this episode useful for your business, take a screenshot and tag me on Instagram at chadcollins.me and use hashtag marketingondemand. That way, I'll be able to see it and repost it. I also created a guide of the top 40 ways people are using marketing on demand strategies and tactics in their businesses. And I want you to have it for free. Just text GUIDE, GUIDE, to 90851, and I'll get it right over to you on demand. Until next time, I'm Chad Evan Collins, and this has been the Marketing on Demand Show.